Welcome to the Bible study called The Many Faces of God, brought to you by St. John's Lutheran Church in beautiful downtown Greenpoint, Brooklyn, coming to you tonight from the equally beautiful Kew Gardens in Queens. We're glad that you've decided to spend this time with us, getting to know how Scripture presents God to us. And the many different guises and almost distinct personalities that we find in the scriptures. Tonight we will be looking at God and his relationship with a number of the patriarchs. Last week we got a look at his relationship with the first of the patriarchs, Abraham, the one with whom he inked a unique and enduring covenant relationship in which he made 3 commitments to Abraham and future generations. One is that he would give them their own land someday in the future. Also, sometime in the future, they would enjoy such outstanding reproductive success that they would be a mighty nation and not have to fear the aggressions of their neighbors who would be scared witless because there were so many Israelites. The third commitment was an exclusive relationship in which God would be the God of Abraham and his descendants, a personal relationship, if you will. And with that commitment, to be the God of Abraham and his successors, was the obligation to provide for the welfare and security of Abraham and those who succeeded him. It was a sweetheart deal. I have to tell you, there was not a whole lot that Abraham had to do in return. He had to accept the offer, of course, but what fool would not? And the only price that was needed to be paid for this generous extension of God's benevolence was that he and his male heirs would submit to circumcision as a sign of the exclusive relationship, but also a not too subtle message that God was the one who was calling the shots when it came to human fecundity. We've seen in these opening chapters of Genesis that God is very, very concerned about reproduction. Go back to the story of the creation, and in that first covenant, God said, I give you dominion over what I have created, and your obligation is to be fruitful and multiply and fill the land. And of all the commandments that God has given us, that is the one that we have embraced with joyous exuberance.
No, but it's me.
Yes. That one, we have just really embraced. Yeah. So Abraham's relationship with the Lord was a different one from his predecessors. Some of the more extreme features of God's personality became muted. There is no genocidal threat or action on God's part, such as he had visited upon the earth in the days of Noah. God was also content to let people pretty much run their own affairs, in the dominion aspect of the requirement that he had given to Adam and Eve. So, the extremes have become muted. Not that they have disappeared, as we shall see. There will be occasions when the ferocity of the Lord, comes forth in horrible splendor. And there will also be occasions when God's creativity and ability to make something that's new, novel, unique, and wonderful will also be demonstrated. But in the relationship with Abraham, the thing that I use to characterize it is that Don Yahweh was a friend of the family, who took Abraham under his wing and put a protective shield around him and took care of him, took care of him. And the loyalty was the sole requirement that Abraham needed to demonstrate. Okay. As one example of how God's previously more ferocious and exuberant characterizations became muted, I'd like to have someone read for us chapter 24, verses 1 through 9. Yeah. All right. Any volunteers?
I'll read it.
Okay.
24, hold on. Chapter 24, 1 through 9. The marriage of Isaac and Rebekah, right?
Yep.
Now Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his house, who had charge of all that he had, "Put your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I live, but will go to my country and to my kindred and get a wife for my son Isaac." The servant said to him, "Perhaps the woman may not be willing to follow me to this land. Must I then take your son back to the land from which you came?" Abram said to him, "See to it that you do not take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my birth, and who spoke to me and swore to me, 'To your offspring I will give this land,' he will send his angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from this oath of mine. Only you must not take my son back there." So the servant put his hand under the thigh of Abram as his master and swore to him concerning this matter.
Okay. Thank you, Tess. I had an irrelevant thought about this when I read this passage. What a strange way to swear loyalty to one's superior. I can hardly imagine the President of the United States taking an oath of office by placing his hand on the thigh of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. But in essence, that exactly is what Abraham asked, his employee to do. I'm sending you on an important mission, and you're not to take my son there, but to carry out your mission nevertheless, and bring back a wife for him. And I think the interesting part about this is that as you go further on in this passage, the servant goes to Ur, where Abraham had come from, to find a bride for his son, and he begins the negotiations for the bride's hand, and he was asked, on whose behalf do you come? So the servant said to the interlocutor, basically, I'm here because my master sent me, who is then I was led by the God of my master, the God of Abraham. Well, it's not too deeply hidden in this passage, that God was, reduced to being the wedding arranger or the marriage arranger for this family. He had the international connections, if you will, and knew where to guide the emissary to find a bride for Isaac. It's one example of how the relationship, between God and these patriarchs is being rebalanced from the earlier relationship that characterized the times of their predecessors. The other thing which we didn't cover last week, but I wanted to mention because it fits in with this theme that I'm making, that the behavior of God was becoming muted. The story of Cain and Abel led us to the conclusion that even though murder or killing in any form had not been prohibited, when God became aware that Cain and Abel got into a fight, and Cain's brother was killed, God took that as an offense and punished Cain for it. And one of the ways you can look at that outrage that God felt is that here Abel had pleased God, but Cain took it on his own initiative to destroy something that God had been part of creating. So the problem that Cain had was that he was trespassing on the prerogatives of God by destroying a human life. Now we read, or didn't read, but we find in the day of Abraham that he went off to war one day, and apparently, as things happen in war, that he and his fellow soldiers killed enemy soldiers. God doesn't put up a fuss with that. It's when his protected people, are threatened. That's when he gets into action, and that was certainly the case in the response God made to the pleas of the Israelites when they were being oppressed and mistreated in Egypt. Something we will look at, next week. Another piece of evidence that we have that the relationship was being rebalanced can be found in Genesis 27, and it's just a few short verses, so I will read it rather than ask for a volunteer. So in Genesis 27, we read, "When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim, so that he could not see, he called his eldest son Esau and said to him, 'My son,' and he answered, 'Here I am.' He said, 'See, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now then, take your weapons and your quiver and your bow and go out into the fields and hunt game for me. Then prepare for me a savory food such as I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may bless you before I die.'" It sounds like a very kindly, fatherly thing to do. It's something that that a loving parent would do for his son, is to bless him. But this is the first time that we read about human beings blessing other human beings. Up to this point, when God was creating all that is, he was the one who was doing the blessings. There's no mention of us participating in that transmission of affection and regard and of relationship. So that another way to look at that is that God is demonstrating that he has more confidence and trust in human beings, and can use the gifts that are given with some degree of wisdom and prudence. Unfortunately for Esau, he wasn't the brightest bulb in the chandelier, and his brother Jacob was a shyster. I mean, there was no other way to get around it. He was a con artist. He took advantage of Esau's need, and got him to give up a birthright for a mess of pottage. Now, I love lentil stew; it's a wonderful dish, but I'm not going to give up my birthright for it. Unfortunately, that was the fate that of poor Esau, and so it was Jacob who got the blessing. But the main point is that humans were becoming more independent and self-assertive, and there's at least in the case of Isaac, he felt that he could do for his children what God had done previously to the creation. Yeah. Jacob was really quite a skilled negotiator. If we look at his dealings with not only with God but with Laban and other members of the household, we can see that he drives a hard bargain. He's going to get the best possible deal that he can get. And for his personal benefit and advantage. I'm sort of at a loss to find something that says that he had loftier, higher moral goals than self-aggrandizement, but I haven't found it yet. No, he was looking out for himself. The fact that he was willing to place demands upon God did not really sit well with God after a while. We find that in Genesis 28, verses 10 through 17. And so I'm going to ask somebody if they would step forward and read that passage for us.
I could do it. So Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and through your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I've done what I've promised you. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven.
Okay. Well, whatever happened in that dream, it was a event which really convinced Jacob that on all things, he had to mind his P's and Q's. He could push God so far, but there came a point, where God was not going to be trifled with or look like a soft pushover. He could marshal quite a display of his might and power, and he certainly did so and impressed Jacob with the degree that God was able to do strange and marvelous things, that demonstrated that he was not a softy in all things, that there was a core in him that was not going to be violated. But that didn't keep Jacob from trying to take advantage of the commitment God had made to his grandfather. We find this in further along in chapter 28, verses 18 through 22. And I will read that. Okay. So after the dream we just talked about, it reads, so Jacob woke up early in the morning and took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called the place Bethel, which means house of God. But the name of the city was Luz at the first. Then Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I may again come to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone, which I have set up for a pillar, shall be for God's house, and of all that he has to give me, I will surely give 1/10 to you. If you notice, in 18 through 20, Jacob is saying, I will accept the offer provided, if you do this for me, I will keep a vow. If you will be with me, I will keep my vow. If you keep me going the way that I go, I will keep the vow. If you give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, I will keep the vow. So that if I come to my father's house in peace, I will keep the vow. And you shall be my God. And this stone, which was set up, the place of the dream at Bethel, will be a sanctuary. God accepted, the conditions that Jacob had laid out, and the story continues, with God continuing to be the friend of the family. I'd like us now to take a look at chapter 32. It's sort of a long one, so if I could have 2 readers on this one, that would be really fine. Can we have someone who will read the first 8 verses?
Okay. 32, 1 through 8. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." So he called that place Mahanaim. Jacob sent messengers before him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, in the country of Edom, instructing them, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have lived with Laban as an alien and stayed until now. And I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male and female slaves, and I have sent to tell my lord in order that I may find favor in your sight." The messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that were with him and the flocks and the herds and camels into 2 companies, thinking, "If Esau comes to the one company and destroys it, then the company that is left will escape."
Okay. Can I have a volunteer to read from 32:9 to, let's see, what's a good breaking point? 21.
I'll do it.
Okay.
And Jacob said, "O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, and I will do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all the steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become 2 companies. Deliver me, please, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I am afraid of him. He may come and kill us all, the mothers with the children. Yet you have said, I will surely do you good and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted because of their number." So he spent that night there, and from what he had with him, he took a present for his brother Esau, 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 camels and their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 30 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. Then he delivered into the hand of his servants every drove by itself, and said to his servants, pass on ahead of me and put space between drove and drove. And he instructed the foremost, when Esau my brother meets you and asks you, to whom do you belong, where are you going, and whose are these ahead of you, then you shall say, they belong to your servant Jacob. They are a present sent to my lord Esau, and moreover he is behind us. He likewise instructed the second and third and all who followed the droves. You shall say the same thing to Esau when you meet him, and you shall say, moreover, your servant Jacob is behind us, for he thought I may appease him with the present that goes ahead of me, and afterwards I shall see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So the present passed on ahead of him, and he himself spent the night in the camp.
Thank you, Megan. Can we get someone to read the concluding passage?
Up until what?
Thank you.
Where do you want to end?
Just read it to 32.
Okay. That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelis do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau. Right. Gotcha.
Yeah, that's good enough. Thank you. Well, this is the climax of the contest between the 2 brothers. And the night before the meeting, Jacob has really no sure sense of how his offer of peace and making amends is going to be received. It could be welcomed, it could be rejected. He just doesn't know. And he's not having a good night of it. Now, you can look at this as a literary device to symbolize the internal conflicts that Jacob was having. But when you look at it this as a part of the storyline, what starts out as a fight between 2 human beings, 2 men, quickly becomes something quite different. The opponent that Jacob is wrestling with, has the prerogatives of the Lord. The ability to bless, is certainly something that God has claimed as one of His own prerogatives, and Jacob asked for that blessing. He also asked, his opponent, to be kind to him. People have made a lot of requests of God, but this is the first one that I know of where kindness is asked for. Yeah, and this is a theme which will become larger and larger and eventually occupy center stage in God's relationship with us. Hitherto, it had all been about power and its usage, about resources and usage, about sex and usage. We now see a kinder, gentler, and more compassionate request being made of God in His dealings with us.
Pastor Nordgren,
Yeah.
one of the things that struck me is that, the whole fight and division between the brothers began because Jacob stole Esau's blessing,
Right.
birthright. And here, after he has gone through so much for so long and has lived as an alien and is finally coming around to trying, however tepidly, to make an amends to his brother. that he is, it's being bookended by another blessing,
Mhm.
from a father figure, as it were. And I think that's, the first blessing he stole, and this blessing he earned through wrestling with God.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's a good point. That blessings are not trivial things. They are transmission from generation to generation. Which privileges some, and others are left out. The other thing about this third part of the chapter is that we see that God fights dirty. I mean, when you're wrestling with a man and you go between his legs, you're fighting dirty. That's not Queen's Mark. What was it? Queensberry rules of fighting. This is going well below the belt. So, but it's the introduction of kindness into the relationship, as I said, begins to blossom at this point. And while we're not going to be doing any reading about Joseph, who is the next patriarch, one of the things that the scriptures tell us is that in several summary statements, it says that God showed many kindnesses to Joseph. Joseph is an interesting thing. I think he is probably a metaphor for a modern person of faith. His relationship with God, is solid. It's integrated into his being. It is not something which is separate and divorced from the rest of what he is and who he is. It is something that he breathes in and breathes out. It informs his choices. It dictates his decisions and behaviors. And he shows gratitude in many different ways. But Joseph does not need God to micromanage his life. He's very competent. He's able to take care of his own affairs. He gets screwed over by his brothers, and got a big fat bushel of lemons and makes lemonades out of it. Comes to a position of prominence, in the Egyptian court, because he is a capable, competent individual, and he takes the gifts that he's been dealt and uses them in ways which in the end benefit his family who had betrayed him. At a time of famine, his brothers come looking for food, and Joseph uses the occasion through some shenanigans. I'll have to give him credit for not being particularly above board in all his dealings with his brothers. So he is human in that regard. He's not a perfect person, but he make amends with his brothers, and is reconciled to them, and is reunited with his father, and he's in position to help them. And he does. And so the Israelites settle in Egypt. And a long time goes by before we pick up the thread again, and that is with Moses. Okay. I'd like to ask if you've had some time to think about the reflection questions. First one is, if we assume power is tempered by love and love is enabled by power, can you give examples of that balance in this section and in your experience? Yeah. Pamela, how about you? What are your thoughts on this question? All right. Megan, what about you?
I was kind of like having a little bit of a hard time with the question, like kind of just trying to figure out exactly what it was getting at, to be honest with you. I mean, I did look at it briefly and like was just trying to like figure out exactly what it was getting at, to be honest.
Okay. Well, let me phrase it in another way. You know, if we say that God is all loving, but not all powerful, then we have an ineffective God who is unable to marshal, whatever it takes to come to our assistance. And if we say that God is all powerful, but is lacking in love, then we would be saying that God has the capability of being a moral monster. You know? Power that is not softened by love is it's a very dangerous thing. And love, which is divorced from power, is a nice sentimental feeling, but does not really make things happen. No. So we're looking at scripture where we like to say, well, God is all powerful, but then how do you mesh that with the the other belief that we have is that God is all loving?
Okay, I think I get it now. I mean, I guess like, when Jacob was like wrestling with him and then like he still gets like the blessing, even though he had kind of done his brother like really dirty, to be honest, stealing the other blessing, like God chose to forgive and then still bless Jacob anyway. And then like the brothers are like, they meet up again after so long, and it seems like, it's mostly just like water under the bridge. And like I imagine maybe like, God probably had a hand in that too, because we don't know what's happening with Esau like before he sees his brother again, maybe he was wrestling with the same thing.
Okay. Yes, how about you? Oh, okay. Pat, you still with us?
Sorry, I wasn't.
Yeah, I'm
Oh,
with you.
sorry.
I'm just,
Go ahead,
go ahead.
Pat.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking about the question, but it's not an easy question to answer, even
Yeah.
when you look at it from the views that you're sharing, because I guess in my lifetime, I have witnessed so many injustices where I'm just wondering, where's the love, where's the compassion, other than what I try to do myself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've seen I worked for transit for 32 years. And I can tell you, I experienced more injustices from some of my fellow workers, from the union and from management. I could write a book.
Hmm.
I mean, and if I share some of the incidences, like there was a particular guy, long story short, who was, nasty to me, to the degree where he would leave used condoms in my work area. Yet, when he got injured and he was bleeding profusely, I was the one that gave him first aid. So that was a choice to rise above the injustices that I experienced. So, I didn't love him, other than in the sense of he was another human being. And just because he spat on me, I wasn't going to turn around and spit on him.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, so when I hear a question like that, it makes me kind of reflect on, we are responsible. We have the gift of free will. So we are responsible for the choices that we make. That's kind of where my head went
Mm-hmm.
when you presented that question.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And Tess, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, sure. I love what Pat pointed out, and it's interesting now that I'm after hearing that, my example was going to be, or at least like the experience, especially thinking through how we've approached, the last few lessons, it was God the creator and then God the destroyer, but now he's the friend.
Mhm.
Things have tempered down and he's now the friend. And it is like, um, when it, like within the family, I'm going to start within the family, right? Like with me and my kids. I'm not saying I'm the all powerful being in this
Mhm.
apartment. Um,
But close enough.
close enough. But,
Yeah.
it is a sort of a, I'm just reminded in this conversation, and that sometimes I learn from the kids, because sometimes I'm very much like I'm your mother. I know, I have more experience than you. This is how it needs to be. You need to do it A, B, C, even though my son wants to do it A, C, B. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
there is some, there has to be some kind of give on my part. That's what I see as the tempered part, because it is driven by love, because he is my son and I want him to be happy and I want us to have this good relationship. And you know and you know but that's in the home. But then when you're thinking it up, outside within the community, you know we love our family friends. I would do anything. I would, jump in the car and help my, closest friends out. But are we really also treating um other people in the community, even strangers that we really don't
Mhm.
know, maybe just by um just an acquaintance or something? Like, would we go that far to help them? Like, would we treat everybody as friends of the family? Because when it's someone in your family, you you prioritize them and you want to help them no matter what. And how can we, I guess for me, I've been trying to think about how can we extend that to other people in the community,
Mhm.
in a fair or equal way.
Yeah. I want to drop back to what you were saying about your role as a parent. And a loving parent wants to, to make kids happy, to give them rich experiences, education, health care, good food, nice, safe place to live. Um, and as you said that, your son, does have his own opinions, and would prefer to do things, in his um, the way he wants to do it. That's part and parcel of growing up. You do get opinions, pretty early in life. And a loving parent who does not believe or recognize that um, giving into a kid's requirements, requests, demands, time after time. Um, you know, that creates children who are very difficult to live with when they grow up. You so the integration of love and power as a parent, I think, is when parents say, I know this is important to you, but I'm not going to let you do it. And you can give the reasons why it's not a good idea, because you have had more experience, you've had time to test out these ways of doing things, and you realize that there's advantages to do it the way that you want it to be done, that your child may not recognize. Other parents, who are sort of deficient on the love and understanding element, will just automatically say no, or they get really, really abusive, use their power, to punish and harm their children. So I think in the realm of raising our kids, we find that balance between love and power becoming a central theme of how we function as parents, with our children. And I think we can just extend to the other relationships, but I think it's so easy to see when you look at it as in the light of a parent-child relationship. You know? Yeah. Well, we got time for one last question. In our society, in our culture, in the ways that we have constructed the examples of our friends of the family. What comes to mind, as a cultural representation of the friend of the family person in our society? Alistair, how about you?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, like there's friends who are family,
Mhm.
but then there are, it's not always who you know, but it's who knows you.
Mhm.
You know, in my position, I know a lot of different kinds of people, from police to politicians to the sanitation guys. I mean, and just everybody. And in those relationships, sometimes you can leverage them to help somebody else, to help yourself. Um, and, you see that. I was thinking of the whole thing of Jacob saying to God, all right, if you feed me, if you take care of me, we'll have this transactional relationship.
Mhm.
Bring me safely home. And I was just like, God, that is such a transactional relationship.
Yeah.
If you do this, and I've heard that so often from people when they say, like, if God will do this, then I will.
Yes.
And those are not the relationships that I enjoy. They're useful relationships, but those are not the relationships that I enjoy. Like genuine concern, care for the community, for the neighborhood, for the people, for my family. Those are the relationships that really give me what I need, really. So, we had a wedding months ago. This couple that got married at church, and they were supposed to get married in like 10 days, and they contacted the marriage license bureau, and they were like, we'll be able to process your request in about 4 or 5 months.
Ooh.
And they were like, no, we're getting married Saturday. And they were like, no, you're not. You're going to have a wedding, but you're not going to have a license. And so I call a city councilman I know. I'm like, hey, I need you to push this application to the front. And within an hour, the couple had their license. So this is a councilman that I do have a friendship with, but I can also go to him and say, look, I need you to push this thing. And he's like, yeah, sure, okay. And, I feel bad for all the other people waiting for months to get their license because they don't know the right person to call to make this happen for them. But I'm really glad that I know who to call when somebody I know needs help.
Yeah. That's what end of the family is. Yeah. Well, as I said last week, I think the cultural icon for the friend of the family, the patron, if you will, is the Godfather series, particularly the first one. That I think very accurately describes, many of the familial and social relationships that existed at the time, when these collections of stories were being put together. Certainly when you get into the time of the Roman conquest of Palestine, they played patronage, as a high stakes game. And one of the things that Jesus had to deal with, was the fact that he was not going to be, the patron of people who came to him for favors. He would, take care of people's problems and send them on their way. But he didn't have a quid pro quo that was attached to the kindness that he had shown to them. And that is all the difference, because if there's the expectation that a favor is going to generate a favor in return, then you have the elements of patronage. And if you have a kindness shown out of grace with no expectation of doing anything reciprocal, then you have not only a very different dynamic, but it sets up a very different relationship between those people involved. There's definitely a hierarchical relationship in the patronage relationship, and certainly much less so in the way that Jesus dealt with people and addressed their problems. One of my favorite verses, is Jesus' declaration in John's Gospel. It says, no longer am I going to call you servants; I'm going to call you friends. That makes a tremendous difference. It obliterates the hierarchy. It obliterates the expectation that you will do the wishes of your patron and show him or her great kindness. And as we found out in The Sopranos, that when you come into a good fortune, you're expected to give your boss a taste of what you've received. Jesus didn't ask for a taste in return. So The Sopranos is probably another good story of what patronage looks like too. Okay, any last thoughts or comments or questions that people have before we wrap up for tonight? No? All right. Well, if I answered all your questions, I've overfunctioned. Next week, we'll be looking at the first 15 chapters of Genesis. And some of the previous features that we saw in
Exodus.
Yes, Exodus. I'm sorry. I was looking at Exodus and said Genesis. Getting old.
That just makes you human.
An old human. But what we had seen sort of muted in the days of the patriarchs, has come roaring back, in God's ferocious, advocacy for, his chosen. So ask you to read those first 15 chapters of Exodus, and we will go into a new element or a new phase of the relationship of God and his people. So I ask you to join me with a closing prayer. O Master of the universe, creator of all that is good and beautiful and holy, the one who has honored us and loved us, who has given us a gift that's of immeasurable worth and value, with no expectation that we do anything in return. Lord, you have showered us with your wisdom tonight. We ask that the things that we have learned, the things that we have been thinking about, the new thoughts and insights that have been generated would be put to use in ways which make us a friend of the family of humanity, wherever we may encounter it in this week. So we ask for this blessing, in your Son's name, and wish you a good night. Amen.